Welcome to City Church's On Demand Messages. My name is Josh, and we're so glad you're tuning in whenever and wherever you're tuning in from. In fact, if it's your first time, we'd love to connect with you. You can text new to the number on the screen right now. We've got a free gift for you. Also, if you need prayer, we would love to pray with you. We believe that prayer is not our last resort, but it is our first response to what is going on in our lives and the lives of those around us. And so we'd love to join in with you. And so you can text next to the number on the screen. Also, if you'd like to invest financially into the mission of City Church to be a Jesus movement that awakens the soul in the city, you can text next as well to the number on the screen. We believe every Sunday morning when we gather in person and online, and we open up God's Word, that He has something special and specific for every one of us. And so as we lean into this week's message that you're about to watch, we pray that God opens up your heart to whatever He has for you, and we hope that you are encouraged by today's message. Again, if we can do anything for you, please let us know. Hey, thank you for being here. My name's Josh. I'm one of the pastors here, and just super excited that I get to just kind of share my heart a little bit, and that you are here as well. I want to echo just what our host Warren has said, and we're so thankful you're here. I'm not going to ask his wife to shout me out in the chat. That's just weird. But I do want to say, if you got here late, you're like, what's happening right now? Don't worry about it. But man, thank you that you're here in the room, online. We love you. We're so glad you're with us as well. We are in this series, week 2 of the series called Roller Coasters. And just kind of asking this question, what do you do when life feels like a roller coaster? What do you do when you feel like everything's going well and then there's just a drop or a turn or a corkscrew or whatever else? What do you do in the pain? What do you do in the questions? I mean, what do you do in those moments? I started to think through that, and then I just asked the question, well, what do people do in normal roller coasters when they hit a drop? And so then I got in this like deep, dark, like rabbit hole of YouTube videos that show like all of everybody screaming and doing all the things. But I gathered some pictures, and maybe this resonates with you if you've ever been on a roller coaster before. But you know there's one point in a roller coaster where they normally take your picture, right? And so the good thing is that they post some of these pictures on the internet. Thanks, internet. And so I thought, hey, let's just watch some. Let's have some fun here. So the first roller coaster picture is this. Maybe this has been you before. I don't know what's happening right now. They're so happy. And this guy's like, I think he's trying to decide, what should I do right now? And this guy's like, no, I'm just feeling it. I am freaked out right now. I don't know what's going on. The next picture is like, so many people get focused on this young lady and her freaking out. I like this guy's face even more because his eyes are just massive. And he's like, oh, what am I doing? What am I doing? All right, next picture. Maybe you go with the eyes closed approach. Like, if I can't see it, it doesn't really happen, right? Like, I'll just avoid it completely, and it'll be over at some point. Okay, some of us, all right, next one. It's just a father-daughter moment right now. I'm thinking, he's like, I'm freaking out. I'm going to be brave for her. And she's like, no, I'm freaking out too. Let's just go in this together. My favorite personal one is this one. Let's just take it. She's like, man, this is tough. This is scary. She's like, I'm supposed to be doing this right now, but I'm still freaking out. And she's like, no, I'm 100% freaking out right now. Anybody like this is you on a roller coaster used to be on? Okay. All right. That's good. I laugh at these things, and I've had many pictures of myself freaking out in roller coasters as well. I just couldn't find any of them, or if I did, I would show them to you. But let's just have a moment of transparency, right? I mean, we laugh about it, but what we do when we're on a physical roller coaster, but when we're on a mental roller coaster, an emotional roller coaster, a life roller coaster, maybe a lot of us don't look like this on the outside, but inside we're feeling this way. Like you're freaking out. It's either like this is either a moment of pain, or this is a moment of just panic, or this is a moment of whatever it is. I mean, we have those moments where life just feels difficult and tough. Last week we talked about just this roller coaster and what it looks like for us. Like we have these high moments of a roller coaster, and we're thinking, man, this is awesome, this is awesome, this is awesome, and then it's the drop and the dip, and we said, what do you do? What do you do when life just bottoms out? What do you do when life drops? What do you do when something gets put on you that you just can't control and you just can't handle? What do you do in the dip? And more importantly, where is God and what is God doing? We talked about last week that we can actually embrace God. We can give Him our problems. We can give Him our frustrations. We can give Him our questions and still trust that He's God. But let's just also just call it what it is. For some of us, the dip is just momentary. But for others of us, the dip is a little bit longer. And others of us, the dip is a little bit longer. And for some of us, we're like, I'm still in the dip. When's the rise going to come? I mean, we feel like, is this thing ever going to end? I know for me, the dip happened 2 years ago. I was on stage, and in a moment, I had this anxiety attack and a panic attack, and I felt like I'm about to pass out, or I'm about to throw up, or I'm about to fall over. Like I just had this moment where I lost complete control. And I thought it was like I didn't eat enough breakfast that morning, but then it happened again second service. And then it happened again the next week, and then it happened again the next week and the next week. And I thought, oh, the dip was going to be momentary. The dip was going to be brief, right? But then the next week happened, and I had it again. The next week happened. It only happened on stage. And I still have people 2 years later asking me, hey, has that gotten any better? And the truth is, no, it hasn't. Every Sunday. And can I tell you the frustration? Can I tell you the frustration of being on stage and being like, this is God, this is what you called me to do, and feeling those emotions every Sunday? And sometimes it's not there, and sometimes it is there. Can I tell you, like we said last week, that when we get hit with the dip, some of us either want to go back to where it felt good. And so I began, when I first started feeling this way, of like, how can I do the things I did before to where I don't have to feel the way that I did in that moment? Or we just say, give up. Can I just be really honest? Like, I had moments where I questioned, maybe I'm not even supposed to be a pastor. And I thought that it would be momentary, but here we are 2 years later, and I'm still walking through it. And this isn't for sympathy, but this is, if we're not honest from stage, we got nothing. And I know for you, the anxiety, like that's nothing compared to, I get that. But for me, it was a give up or go back moment for me. And at times, I still wrestle with that. What do you do when the dip seems so long? What do you do in the dip? And the bigger question is, can God even do anything in the dip? Can he do anything in us? We're looking at this story of this guy named Habakkuk. We're going to be in Habakkuk chapter 2 this morning. But we see this story of Habakkuk, and Habakkuk looks around at God's nation, who he's a part of, and he sees this nation that's just giving into sin, that's forsaking God's commandments and his laws. And Habakkuk comes to God, and he says, God, what are you doing? Why aren't you intervening? Why aren't you doing anything? And then God says, I'm going to raise up a pagan nation to actually bring Israel back to their feet and back to their face in front of me. And so he begins to say this. But Habakkuk just asked God point blank, what are you doing? Wait, do you even care? Like, are you even there? Are you even going to move on our behalf? Maybe you've been there. You've asked the question, God, do you care? Are you doing anything at all? And will you do anything at all? We see Habakkuk wrestling with these questions. And as we look at this dip, you know, if we had to look at the dip and the longevity of the dip, no matter what it looks like for us, the thing is this, it's not the dip, or it's not the dip, that's not a word. It's not the depth of the dip, it's the duration of the dip. That's the hard part, right? If you just told me, man, this is going to suck for a little while. How can I say it? I just said it on stage. Okay. So, like, if you just told me that this is going to be awful for a little while, I can deal with all the pain if you tell me it's going to be over in a month. It's not the depth, it's the duration. It's the I don't know when this is going to be over. And Habakkuk's asking God these questions. God, what do I do in those moments? How do I handle this in those moments? And so Habakkuk chapter 2, we see Habakkuk begin to respond. We see God begin to do something in Habakkuk and lead him to a place of saying, hey, this dip is going to be a little bit longer than you want it to be, actually a lot longer than you want it to be, but I want to do something in you in the dip. Instead of you just holding on and trying to survive in the dip, I want you to thrive in the dip. I got to stop saying dip. In the depth of the dip. Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 1 says this. This is what Habakkuk says. I will take my stand at my watchpost. Remember that word. We'll come back to it. And station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. And the Lord answered me and said, write the vision. Make it plain on tablets so he may run who reads it. Verse 3, this is the encouraging part. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end, it will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. If your dip seems slow, wait. If the pain seems slow, wait for it. If the answers seem delayed, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. So God says, I have an answer for you, but it's in the future. Great, thanks, God. I mean, we felt that before. Like God's like, I got an answer for you. And we want to believe that, right? Like, God, I want to believe you got an answer for me, but I would really like the answer right now. I mean, God, I would love that. But God says, I have an answer for you, but it's going to be in the future, so wait. The dip, the drop, the pain is actually God's waiting room. And where he takes us to grow and to mature us. We hate to wait. I mean, we hate to wait. Like, it's on average that the average American will spend 2 years of their life waiting in line. 2 years of my life waiting in line. The average American will spend 43 days of their life on hold on the phone. That seems so frustrating. For some of us, we hate waiting in line. Others of it's greater. We hate waiting for peace. We hate waiting for reconciliation, whether that's relationally, whether that's racially. We hate waiting for things, but God says, I'm actually good with waiting, and I'm incredibly comfortable with waiting, which is frustrating to us, but he says, I do some of my best work when my children choose to wait on me. So I think when we look at Habakkuk's story, I think he teaches us, God wants to teach us two things, and he wants to give us two things. He wants us to receive two things in the dip, in the drop, in the questions, in the frustration, in the anger, in the hurt. He wants us to receive two things. The first thing that he wants us to receive is patience. Verse 3 says this, for still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end, it will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come, it will not delay. You see, patience is the capacity to accept or tolerate delay. Patience is actually laying down our burden of assumed omniscience. So omniscience means all-knowing. And so what we have is we struggle with the disease, with the sickness of assumed omniscience, that I know how long this should take. Like, God, you may not, I know, like, for my neighbor, like, they're not as mature as I am, but God, I know how long this should take. I know how long the dip, the drop should take. I know how long my suffering should take. God, I know and I understand. I know how life should go. Man, the encouraging thing is we measure our time, we measure our life in days, months, years, hours. But God is outside of time, so he sees the whole journey. This blows my mind, 2 Peter 3:8. But do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord, one day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. So for us, we're saying, God, is the answer going to come tomorrow? Is it going to come next week? Is it going to come next month? Because that's the way our brains work. God looks at the span of our life and sees the entire thing, like mind blown. And so we're saying, God, is that going to be next week? And God's saying, no, I've got it right where it needs to be in the journey because I know where I want you to be after that. And I know where I want you to be in that. And so your assumed omniscience is cute that you know what it takes. But for me, I've got an understanding because we have deadlines and God has a timeline. God sees the entire timeline and we give God deadlines. God, I need this to happen. I need this to happen fast. You don't understand. I need it. So God, I'm going to give you a deadline, or I'm going to create a deadline in my head of it's got to happen by this point. It's got to happen by this space. It's got to happen by this time. And God sees an entire timeline while we see deadlines. And so the challenge for us in patience is to receive God's timeline instead of giving him our deadlines. So we receive God, we receive that you understand our timeline. And when we do that, we can be encouraged that God's delays are not always God's denials. So what we assume as a no, because it hasn't happened in our timeline, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a no. Will it be a no? It possibly could. I want to be like God's delays are not God's denials, but I can't fully say that. I got to put not always. But there are times when we are so frustrated and so rushed for an answer, so rushed for peace, so rushed for resolution and reconciliation. And God said, no, not just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And so just because you feel like it's a denial, it's just a delay. So instead of being frustrated at the delay and at me, could you lean in and grow some patience? I mean, just think about how our lives would be so much better if we had more patience. Just think about how I'm just thinking how much better of a parent I would be if I had more patience. Because my kids ask me the same question 12 times in 2 minutes. And I'm like, didn't we just have this conversation? Didn't I just ask you this? Or didn't you just ask me this? And then like 3 minutes later, it's another 12 questions, but it's not 12 different questions. It's just 12 of the same questions, but it just has like a different word in it. So it's instead of it's can, it's may I, or instead of the, it's a, or whatever else. Like, let me just switch it up a little bit, and maybe he won't know that I'm asking the same. No, I get it. I'm an adult. I get that you're asking the same exact question again. I mean, how much better would our friendships be if we had more patience? How much better would our work life be if we had more patience? This is just for any of us, right? Like if you're a Christian, absolutely. If you're not a Christian, we all need patience. We all need it. And God says, I have an abundance of it at your disposal if you will receive, if you will listen, We talked last week of what do we do in the dip? We embrace, right? We open up. And last week we said like opening up means God sharing what is going on in our hearts, but opening up also allows us to receive what God has for us. And what God's telling Habakkuk is, I've got some patience that I want you to exercise, that I want you to lean into. So we see the first thing that God offers us is patience. The second thing that God has for us right now in the dip and the drop is perspective. So Habakkuk says, I will take my stand at my watch post and station myself on the tower. So what he's talking about is an actual watchtower that looks similar to this. So what you would do, what a watchtower is for, is to climb up top and to gain a different perspective. So if you were in the military, the army, you would climb up top to see when the army was coming to attack. If you had friends coming into town, you would climb up top to get a better vantage point. You get a different perspective, a different view. And so what Habakkuk says is, I'm going to climb up to the watchtower to get a different perspective on what you're doing right now, God. I'm going to position myself in a different space, in a different place to receive and ask and have what you're going to do for me, God. I'm asking this question. When you are in the dip, when we are in a dip or in a drop of doubt, we have to try to get God's perspective on our pain. We have to ask questions that we normally wouldn't ask ourselves. We have to put ourselves in places where we can see it in a different light instead of seeing what's happening right in front of us. There are so many people in the Bible that went through so many dips and so much pain, so many drops. One of those people is the Apostle Paul. Paul was the first and maybe the greatest church planner ever. Like he just went around from town to town starting and planting churches. Paul talks about this in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16 to 17. He says this, so we do not lose heart. Can I just pause there and just ask you and encourage you, don't lose heart right now. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light and momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. So what Paul says is God's doing something inside of us. And he says this light and momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. What he's saying is that the light and momentary affliction does not compare to what God has for us in eternity. Now, Paul's light and momentary affliction may have been different than yours. You tell me. But for Paul, he tells us a few chapters later that my light and momentary affliction was that I was put in prison at least 2 times. Some believe 3 to 4 times. He received 39 lashes, which is being whipped 39 times, at least 5 times. Paul was beaten with rods 3 times. He was stoned, and that's when, like, you get hit with a lot of rocks, okay? A couple of you, yep, all right. But he literally stoned almost, and he says this in this chapter, almost to the point of death multiple times. He was shipwrecked 3 times, and at least for 24 hours, he was lost at sea. And so what Paul says is, my light and momentary affliction is nothing compared to the weight of glory that God has for me. And I believe that it is in eternity, but it is also here and now. He's saying, if you take all of these things, like all the stuff I've gone through, and I don't know what you've gone through. I don't know what your 39 lashes is. I don't know what your shipwreck is. But it feels the same way it felt to Paul. It feels helpless. You feel helpless, and it feels hopeless. And Paul's saying, and he's not making light of it, but what he is saying is, when I put it in comparison, man, God has so much more for me. In Romans, Paul says this. Romans chapter 8, verse 18, he says, for I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed to us. That word reckon, in Greek, it literally means to count. It's addition, to add up, to count up. So here's what Paul is saying. He's saying, I've taken all the things that I'm going through and have gone through. I've taken the dip, the drops, the pain, the suffering, what Paul says is almost to the point of death. And he said, what I did basically was I took all those things to math class. And I took all my afflictions and the pain was real. This isn't a suck it up buttercup or any of that. But I took all these things and I took glory, what God has for me, what he wants to do in me and through me, and what he has for me in eternity. And I began to add them up. So the lashes, the beatings, the shipwrecked, stoning, lost at sea, life threatened. I add all of those things up. And then I came over here and began to ask, God, what are you doing in me and through me? And God, what do you have for me? And I just started to add them up. He said, I started doing it by the handfuls, and then I just eventually just had to dump. And what he said was, when I did that, when I took God to math class, and I gained a different perspective, and I saw the light and momentary, although affliction, it was affliction, it is affliction. Can I just say that right now? That what you're going through, I'm not trying to minimize it. I don't think God is either, because I think when we minimize our pain, then we actually minimize God. I'm not minimizing that, but what he did say is I took it to class, and I began to add those up, and then I came over here, and I began to say, okay, God, but what do you have for me eternal? I mean, Paul was the guy that was like, to live is Christ, to die is gain. Basically, if you let me live, like, I'm going to keep on telling about Jesus, and if you kill me, I'm going to go be with Jesus. So, like, come at me, bro. Like, you can't touch me, all right? Like, I mean, when I did all of that, and when I saw what God was doing in me and through me, I mean, this is the guy that says, like, I have this thorn in my flesh, and I pleaded with God, God, would you take it away? Would you take it away? Would you take it away? And God never took it away. God, when I saw what you did with me through all that, and I began to see it all, like, this cannot even compare to this, but here's where we get stuck. Here's where I get stuck, is I get so close to my pain, because it's my pain, and I look at it through this lens. You see, here's the problem when I'm this close to the pain. I can't see past the pain to see what God has for me. Now, it's there, right? Like, literally, I looked at it right here, right? It's there. It's there. I know it's there, but the problem is when I'm right here, I can't see it. I can't see it. And God says, I'm not saying push down your pain. I'm not saying suppress your pain. I'm not saying run from your pain or give up from your pain. But what I am inviting you into in this dip, in this drop, is would you, instead of just looking at your pain, would you just take a step back, however you can? Would you come up to my watchtower and would you gain perspective and see your affliction and see that it is real, but see what I have for you on the other side and in the dip? Could you for us, like, just, I love what we sing, for a moment, everything could change. Just for a moment. Just for a moment. Could you step away from the pain and don't suppress it, don't push it down, but just for a moment. Could you see what's beyond it? And if you can't see fully, if you don't know, I don't know how many ping pong balls are in there, because you at least admit that it's better than this. And even that, God says, even in that one moment of perspective shift, I can do immeasurably more in the dip. Don't wait to get to the next mountaintop to think that I can do something in you right now. Would you allow me to shift your perspective? Would you allow, but you have to do something. You know, part of what I love about this is that what I first have to do is to acknowledge that I have pain, that I am hurting, that this exists. That's okay. Welcome to the family. We're all messed up. We're all busted. We're all broken. We're just trying our best to gain a different perspective to see that there's something on the other side of this. But we acknowledge that we're here. And maybe for you, you've got the strength and the leading to take a step up for yourself. But maybe you need somebody else to come alongside of you and pick you up and say, hey, just take a couple steps over just for a second. Just for a second. And would you see what God has for us? Perspective. In that perspective, man, Paul says there's glory. There's there's so much, and there's patience in here, like a plethora, an abundance of patience in that. Would you take a perspective? And I think we have to ask this, what would a new perspective bring to your pain? Would it bring some clarity? Would it bring some confidence? I think what new perspectives do, though, is I think most importantly, I think they change our prayers. Because when I'm standing face to face right in front of this, my prayer is, God, would you change my situation? When I take a step up and I see both, it goes from, man, that's real, God, and if you would change it, that's great. But God, I see what you have for me. So God, instead of change my situation, God, would you change me? God, would you change my heart? Would you change the kind of husband I am? God, would you change the kind of friend I am? God, would you do something in me? God, I don't know when you're going to bring me out of this dip. I don't know when you're going to change things in my heart. But I do know, God, that what I can ask right now is that you would do something in me and through me. Would we allow God to change our perspective? Patience and perspective doesn't minimize our pain, but maybe, just maybe, through the Holy Spirit, it can help make a little more sense of it. I want to read this over us one more time to just encourage us. James 1, verses 2 through 4. Count on all joy, my brothers, when you meet various trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith, the dip, produces steadfastness or patience. And let that steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect, complete, and lacking nothing. God says, I love you way too much to leave you in a state of baby faith. I want to develop a deep faith that will trust me in the middle of the dip. But will you allow yourself to open up? And in embracing me, would you also receive what I'm trying to give you? I want to ask us for a moment just to bow our heads and close our eyes.